welcome to RealAg Live, everybody. I'm your host, Sean Haney. Thanks a lot for tuning in today to this midweek edition of our daily live streaming show. Like every show, we want you to participate and join in the conversation. If you're watching on YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, or Twitch, all you got to do is enter it in the comment box, and we'll get to as many of those questions as possible. Today we're going to have a lot of fun. I love talking to authors of books, and I've had a chance to interview Tim Caulfield in the past, and I'm looking forward to our discussion today. Let's bring him in here. It is from the University of Alberta, Tim Caulfield. Hey, Tim, how are you?
Hey, Sean. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, hey, you know what? I'm going to do a formal introduction of you here. So I'm looking at the back of the book. That's a very, very nice picture. I like that. You are a Canadian Research Chair at Health Law and Policy, and a professor at the Faculty of Law and School of Public Health, and Research Director of the Health Law Institute of the University of Alberta. Like I mentioned, Tim has a new book out. Here it is. It is called, I like the title. It's very sensationalist. It is Relax Damnit, with like a exclamation mark at the end. Tim, talk about the title and why, and what message you're trying to get across in this book.
Yeah, the title, and it's funny because people have brought it up a lot. I think it was going to be provocative, but it turned out to be, so that's all right. So the title really is about inviting people to relax about all the noise that surrounds us. You know, the book is an exploration of all the decisions we make throughout the day, and I really try to highlight that misinformation, fear-mongering, very relevant in the agricultural community, ideology, a little bit of ideology, all of these things shape the decisions that we make throughout the day. And as you know, right now, misinformation is a huge topic, and it has an impact on really big things, you know, including the agricultural community. And I thought it'd be kind of cool to look at how those same forces impact a lot of the decisions we make throughout the day. So I look at decisions big and small, like there's even funny, frivolous stuff like toilet seat up, toilet seat down. There's actually science on that. And I also look at things that are more, you know, a little bit, you know, in depth, and a lot of other things like nutrition, obviously, and some parenting things, and really try to break down both what the science says about those decisions, but perhaps more importantly, and with more provocatively, I look at the social forces that impact all of us, in how we make those decisions.
Yeah. So on the
political thinking, Laura.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. And the book, on the inside of the dust jacket, an entertaining and practical guide to getting through the day with less stress and better health. Now, what I find interesting, when you mentioned it, get through the day, this is an interesting structure in the sense that you've structured the entire book around getting through the day, from the point you wake up to the very, very end of the day, with a time stamp and the activity that you're looking at. Was that the kind of clearest way to really get this message across?
Yeah, I thought it is a typical day. When I tell that to people, they say, "Oh, well, you're just talking about decisions differently." No, I go through a day. I go through the typical the kind of decisions that we make throughout the day, and I thought that was a good way of really emphasizing how even sort of very basic decisions are influenced by various cultural forces, for better or worse. And the other thing is, I emphasize this in the introduction, I'm not trying to tell people how to live their day. Almost on the contrary, it's relax, do whatever works for you. It's maybe I could have called it that instead of relax, damn it.
So are we a little bit uptight? Or is this growing? Are we becoming more stressed out about little things? What's going on here? What's at work?
I do think we are, and there's evidence to back that up. We live in a society that really is an amplifier of fear and an amplifier of risk, and there is a little bit of evidence to back up the fact that social media is partly to blame for that. Marketing is partly to blame for that, but it does, I think, make like little decisions more difficult. And I mean, even like the very first decision in the book is when to wake up, right?
Mm-hmm.
And people have made that biological act pretty complicated. They really, really have. And there's a lot of farmers probably, and people who work in the agriculture community. You guys get up early, so maybe this doesn't relate to you, but in the business world and the academic world, there's this idea that somehow getting up ridiculously early is a noble thing to do, and you're going to be more productive, and you're kind of a loser if you don't.
Yeah.
It even started back in the 80s with that Wall Street mentality. No one needs to sleep, right? You sleep when you're dead. That's a really good example. That's the very first decision, right? And there's actually not a lot of evidence to back that up. We all have our own rhythm, right? And it doesn't make you more productive. On the contrary, and we should basically kind of ignore that noise. And so that's just, man, I could go through the whole day and break down.
So the research you did, the early bird does not get the worm, or is, like my dad used to say, more money is made before 7 a.m. than any other time in the day. Like those things.
No and no. There really isn't any evidence to back it up. Now, there's a whole bunch of interesting correlation studies, and you always have to be careful about correlation versus causation, right? That suggests that people that get up later and work, stay up later, have, they eat poor and things like that, and maybe don't exercise. But that's a correlation causation thing, probably, right? Doesn't necessarily mean that the act of getting up is the culprit. But the interesting thing is, I love getting up early. Like, I'm kind of a morning person, so this argument is sort of cutting against my own natural tendencies.
Yeah. What are some of the other activities in the day that we do them because maybe they were sort of passed on, or we do them just because it's a habit and we think it's the right thing to do, but it's not really supported very much in science or research?
Yeah, that's a great question, because there's a lot of things in the book that I have that outline things that we do because they kind of feel intuitively correct, or they've just been embedded in our culture. I'll use breakfast as an example.
Okay.
Breakfast has long been presented as the most important meal of the day. And again, it's kind of like getting up early. It's this noble thing you're supposed to eat. And there really isn't evidence. I'll put it this way. It's a good example of where there's this truism in culture, most important meal of the day, but the actual research, and there's lots of it, Sean, is messy. Like, it's not definitive, right? And in general, breakfast is one of those things. If it works for you, awesome, right? If not, don't sweat it, kind of thing. And having a healthy breakfast is probably a good idea, but the evidence around it is not, like you would think it would be. And the interesting thing also, if you look at the history of breakfast, Kellogg, the guy that made the cereal, became wealthy. He had part of our beliefs about breakfast come from his marketing. And he's this guy, he was this really Puritan guy and really believed, I'm sure, that you got to get up early and you have to live this very virtuous life. And he kind of tied having breakfast into all of that. So also very interesting history to it.
Yeah, that's what I've read before. It was actually the breakfast cereal companies that really drove a lot of this narrative around breakfast, most important meal of the day, because we have cereal to sell you. That's marketing, and that's we can talk about food marketing. I'm sure a whole show on its own. Question here from Kara, watching on Facebook. I haven't had the chance to read the book yet. Do you have any research surrounding shutting your brain off once work is done?
Yeah, go Kara. That's she's. I guess you don't need to read the book, Kara. No, I'm just kidding. Read the book for confirmation bias. Yeah, so that is one of the strategies that I talk about in the book, because part of the title is really about this chaotic information environment. And that's really where the Relax Damnit comes from, right? Don't listen to this chaotic information environment. And this is, Kara's point is actually one of the things that I learned about myself writing the book, that has had the biggest impact on my life. I really think it's real important both to shut out the noise, so social media, shut out the negative news, to give yourself a break. And I try to do that from 9 o'clock on every night. I don't succeed all the time, but I really try. And I put my phone away. I try to put it away so it's difficult for me to just scroll, right? And there's actually interesting research to show that this works. It's an important strategy. It may help you sleep at night. It may even make you a more critical thinker because you're able to kind of relax and reflect a little bit more on the information out there. And so, yeah, even in the context of the pandemic, there have been interesting studies that have suggested this is a good idea. Now, people have noted that the pandemic has caused a lot of stress, a lot of anxiety. And there was an interesting piece in the New England Journal of Medicine that really suggested that this is partly attached to just being constantly bombarded by information. So again, yeah, relax, shut it out every once in a while. And some people even suggest, and I talk about this in the book, doing that periodically throughout the day. Now, it's hard for some people to do that if it's part of your job, but if you can, it makes sense. So great point there.
Yeah, I remember last fall, I lived this exact experience. So during the day, I look at my phone way too many times. I'm constantly being fed, emails just pouring in, like a lot of people. Last fall, we, myself and video producer Jay from RealAg, we were in Germany. And on the Saturday, we were preparing for a big farm show, Agritechnica. And on the Saturday before the show, we had an open day. And so we said, let's get caught up in some work. And what was interesting is that I really noticed it because we were so far ahead in the time zone. My phone wasn't ringing. There was really no reason to look at it. The emails weren't pouring in, because it was a Saturday. Plus, we were on European time. And I was like, I have been so productive for these 6 hours. It is amazing. And I realized the big difference it wasn't the fact that we were having a nice sip of a beer while we were doing work. It was the fact that I wasn't distracted by some of these other things that are going on all the time.
You're 100% correct. And I talk about this in the book. I even talk about email management in the book. The amount of time that is sucked up in our culture handling email is absolutely astounding, right? It really is. And I joke in the book that when you look at a crowd of people in a big city, you're looking at a crowd of email answerers. It's people just spend so much time dealing with email. And if you can just do that in a more efficient manner, you are going to make, free up time for yourself. It's hard. I'm sure, like many people listening right now, you could spend all day long doing nothing but answering email, right? So you have to think of some kind of strategy to free up time. And as a writer, I'll even do, it sounds ridiculous, Sean, but I'll say, I can't look at anything for half an hour, just a half an hour, and it can be a challenge. And then you get into the flow, right? And then it's awesome. And then you just keep going. But it is an incredibly important strategy. I think Kara brought it up first, and I think a really important recommendation for our modern times.
If you just joined us, we're talking to Tim Caulfield, author of his new book, Relax Damnit. I just like saying that title. Okay, at 4 p.m. you address another one of the things that my dad just cemented into my brain. It is the firm handshake. You go in there and you just squeeze. What is the science behind that?
Well, it's interesting. It's a great question for right now because
are we allowed to shake hands anymore?
Yeah, it'll be very interesting to see if the handshake survives. Now, the handshake, I had a lot of fun researching that, and I researched way more than what made it into the book. But there's, it's been around for a very long time, handshaking, and there's even and it's hard to get good science behind this, but there is even scientific speculation, I'll put it that way, that there's a biological component to it, sort of like dogs sniffing butts.
Really?
We would shake hands, and they've done these observational studies where people actually touch their face after they shake a hand, and there's a speculation that it had to do with odor. All that aside, the bottom line is that handshaking's been around for a long time. Yeah, think about that next time. I don't think we should segue to butt smells.
No.
But the evidence around handshaking, there's actually evidence that it does create trust. It does have all these beneficial outcomes and so it'll be interesting to see if it comes back. I speculate no. I think we're gonna end up with the fist bump. Now, I'm a little bit of a germaphobe. I don't know if you knew that about me, Sean.
No.
So I'm all for the fist bump, and I think that's where we're gonna land in 20. Because it was already starting to come in, and so I think we're gonna see that in the future. I'm also not a hugger. And so,
Oh, I,
are you
I,
a hugger?
I like the hug. Yeah, I like the hug. Not in a, I get the fist bump over the handshake thing because I think there's just too many people that don't wash their hands after they
Yeah,
pee.
they do not.
Uh,
Oh, I talk about that in the book too. The numbers are
yeah.
grim, especially guys. We're
How is
terrible.
that possible?
I know. The numbers are shocking, shocking. Like less than 5% of people wash their hands. Um, doing an objective measurement, less than 5%. And now, some people think it's going to go up. I think there'll be a lot of interesting research going on right now, post pandemic. But I bet the numbers are still grim. So if you ask people, even if you ask people, the numbers are low, right? So that's just subjective, and people want to give you the right answer. The numbers are like half. But if you do an objective measurement, it's like less than 5% of people do it well. And so, yeah, remember that next time you go in for that that firm handshake.
Yeah. Brian asks, realistically, how much more hygienic is a fist bump over a handshake, though?
So great question, Brian. They've actually done studies on that. It is more hygienic, but you're still touching, so there's that element to it. But also, one of the problems with handshakes is you touch your face, right? And so the fist bump, what's being touched is less likely to transmit. So there's that element. But believe it or not, they really have studied it. And the other thing is they've also studied how much germs are transmitted through handshakes. And yes, there is, but it's not maybe as bad as you would think. But definitely, handshaking is a pretty important, basic preventative strategy that we should all adopt.
Brad watching on Facebook brings up a good point. He says, I'm awkward in the fist bump. I am kind of too, though. You kind of go in, you're not sure if you should go afterwards or like have some sort of like, how do you release from the fist? Just it's awkward. I'm still getting used to it too.
Brad, I joke about this in the book. Maybe I have a little bit of a confirmation bias going because I'm a terrible handshaker. I always get like the two in there and they grasp. And so when I was writing the book, I decided, because I spent a long time writing this book. I decided every time I had a bad handshake, I wanted the do-over. So even if I didn't, I've never met this person before, I go, okay, we got to do a do-over. And they always agreed because it was clearly a terrible handshake. So maybe that's one of the reasons I lean towards the fist bump. And there's also the fist bump that's used on cruise ships. I can't remember, cruise bump they call it, which is only 2 knuckles, like in order to try to even minimize touching even more. So, but let's come back together in a couple of years, Sean, and we'll see if the fist bump is winning out over all these other customs.
Yeah, Lara says, I think even more awkward is the elbow bump or the foot shake. I am not foot shaking. I don't care what anybody says.
I'm not foot shaking either.
At 5:45, you talk about hanging with the kids, and you talk about some data in terms of how stressed out and guilty and the anxiety that people have in terms of trying to measure up to some sort of benchmark in terms of how much time are you spending with your kids. Can you talk about that one a little bit?
Yeah, and this is maybe one of those topics. In the book, I have one topic a little more serious, and I think this would be in that category. And I even talk a little bit about my own upbringing. There is a tremendous amount of pressure on parents now, right, to spend as much time as physically possible with their kids. And there's a little bit of evidence that in part that's because of social comparison, because people are on Facebook talking about their parenting and they're on Instagram showing themselves as these perfect parents doing things with their kids, crafts and stuff. And so it's like you're supposed to be spending as much time as possible with your kids. And if you're not, you're a bad parent. That's sort of the, I want to be careful not to overgeneralize, but that's kind of the meta message that's out there. And celebrities are part of this too, Sean. Them posting about being sacrificing everything to spend time with their kids. And the reality is, despite what people feel, we're spending more time with our kids now than ever before, probably in the last couple hundred years. The data from like when I was a kid, it's like on average, a male would spend like, I can't remember, it's like minutes a day with their children. Right? And now we're spending more time than ever. And there really isn't a lot of evidence that it has a huge impact on your kids, right? So the point there is, just relax. Do the best you can. You love your kids, and of course, this is probably obvious. A lot of it has to do with quality versus quantity, right? And the other thing I talk about in the book, and a lot of the experts I spoke to refer to this, you're a parent, right, Sean?
Yeah, we have three kids in high
Yeah,
school. Whew.
yeah. I've got 4 kids. I win. So we the the great moments, and I'm curious if you agree with this as a parent. They come just living your life. Like, you can't really necessarily manufacture the magic, right? It just happens. You're doing stuff together. You're making dinner together. You're cleaning up together. You're having some. They just come. And a lot of the experts I talked with, refer to that. Don't feel guilty that you have to manufacture these magical moments with your kids. Just do the best you can. Be a loving parent, and they're going to come. And I think that everyone who's listening who are parents know this already. The point I'm not going to tell them how to be a parent, but the point of the book is we can ignore that guilt noise that's emanating from everywhere.
Yeah, but you mentioned social media. And I really believe that Instagram and Facebook have created this sort of like unrealistic like benchmark of a lot of things, like whether it's what you cook at home or maybe
Yeah.
potentially it is how good of a parent you are. And it's just that's a capturing a little moment in time. It's not even necessarily, it doesn't even tell the whole story of what that relationship is even like at all. And I really think social media, and I would like your thoughts on it,
Yeah.
how much social media is creating all of this anxiety that you're telling us to relax from.
Yeah. Huge. So you're exactly right. Your intuition is correct. And there is an increasing body of evidence to back it up. It is this whole social comparison phenomenon. And, I even talked about it in my last book, the Gwyneth book, where we create this fake destination that doesn't even exist. In social media tells us this is how your life could look. And it's completely curated. It's not real. And it is really it's problematic for kids, I think, because it creates these false goals, these false destinations, and it's also harmful on, I think on parenting. The pressure is unbelievable. And one of the comments that was just up there was talking about, you're not necessarily your kid's best friend. It's true. There's something to letting your kids. There it is. Lindsay was saying, just being bored. I think there's something to that. And I talk about that with kids walking to school, and letting them have independence and stuff. With my 4 kids, I think that I look at it the other way. I feel like I've got 4 friends, so I can exploit that relationship the other way, even if they don't feel the same way about me.
As I mentioned to you before we started, my daughter's working on her social, grade 11, and once in a while I hear some of the lecture. And I'll sort of do a bit of a take. What did the teacher just say? And I like it. She's like, "No, Dad, no." Yeah. Let's see here. I had a question from Brian on this parenting one. Maybe not quite on topic, but where was the shift to the helicopter parents I see today versus what we grew up like?
Yeah, I do talk about this. It's not off topic. Thanks. I have a whole section on it. And Brian, the way I look at it is I have a section on letting your kids walk to school. And use that as sort of an entry point to talk about the helicopter parenting phenomenon. And it's very closely related because it does have to do with this guilt, right? So letting kids walk to school is interesting because, Sean, what do you think the number one reason Canadian parents don't let their kids walk to school?
They think they're going to get kidnapped.
Yep. Stranger danger, right? Yep. And there are other things going on. There's obviously concerns about traffic and maybe convenience, and you're driving someplace anyway. But that's even if you ask them. So that's what they're admitting to, and I think it would even be higher if you were looking at sort of the background of what's driving the decision not to let kids walk to school. And it's a really good example of how we misperceive risk. The chance of your kid being abducted by a stranger are so vanishingly small. Like, it's not going to happen. Like, it borders, from a statistical perspective, it borders on 0, right? But if they don't walk to school, they're not exercising. They're not, sort of getting bored, kicking a rock along, which is healthy, right? They're not, socializing with their friends. All of those things are beneficial. And it's just the exercise one alone. And we can't visualize the risks of not letting your kid get those experiences. Those are real risks, right? Versus the almost manufactured risk of your kid getting abducted. And And that's because that's just so horrific. It's the availability bias, one of our cognitive biases, that it overwhelms our rational thinking. And then what happens is, this goes into Brian's comment about helicopter parenting. You're a bad parent if you do let your kid walk to school, and there's this shame, and somehow you're not measuring up, and it just becomes this horrible cycle. And I could go on and on about this, and then the traffic gets terrible, and there's just so many sort of unintended consequences from this decision that isn't based on evidence, but rather based on sort of social pressure.
So there's a line here in the final chapter where you establish your Relax Damnit rules, and it says, while writing this book, I did have many sleepless nights as I tried to work through how, in this age of unprecedented levels of access to knowledge, we so frequently and consistently get it wrong. Why is it, in today's world, with all of the information that is in front of us, like we have more information at our fingertips a click away, that we are still so uninformed on so many of these things?
Yeah, I call it the knowledge paradox. It is incredible. And a lot of people, I don't know if you can remember, I don't know if you're old enough to remember these conversations, Sean, but it was this idea that we were moving towards a information utopia almost with the internet, and almost the opposite has happened. And part of it is because of the nature of of social media and the entities that control knowledge. It's become very fragmented. The way knowledge is presented to us is presented in a very confused manner. We live in an era of polarization, which makes it more difficult to get accurate information. We live in an era of risk, as I talked about fear mongering, which I talked about already, that makes it difficult for us to tease out what's real and what's not real. All of these social forces kind of work together to make it difficult to tease out what is based on science and what's not based on science. And in the book, I try to give a few tools, and they're simple, they're straightforward. It's not like you have to get some in-depth course. The basic critical thinking skills, I think, are easy to adopt. Easy for anyone to adopt and utilize, and there's studies to back that up.
Well, I'll hit on one that I kind of highlighted here. One of them is contrary to what I learned in university and in marketing classes, which was the power of the word of mouth. And you say one of your third rules is do not be persuaded by anecdotes or testimonials. So ignore those words of mouth.
It's so true. And this is really relevant to the agricultural world, by the way, because a lot of fear mongering in nutrition and food is based on testimonials. So there's actually very interesting research that suggests that a good testimonial, a powerful anecdote, will overwhelm our critical thinking skills. And if something is presented and a testimonial or a narrative is used as the primary source of evidence, you can almost certainly ignore it. Now, that's not to say that narratives and testimonials and anecdotes aren't useful communication tools. On the contrary, you want to use those to get across the good evidence. And you're starting to see the science community do it. Holy cow, you're seeing the agricultural community doing it. You guys are doing a great job, by the way, of doing it. Telling stories about the farm, telling stories about how food is made. That's the way you do it, right? And then you land on what the real science says, the real evidence says. We've got to do it more. The people pushing the misinformation have been doing it for a long time. We've got to start doing it now.
Yeah, one of the points here, actually was the first one, was consider the kind of science used to support the claim that's being made. Has COVID kind of, if you look at sort of the different sides of science on COVID, we look at some, as we start to have vaccines approved now, we see there's people that, have different versions of science on the vaccines. Has this whole time period taught us that we're never going to agree on some of these scientific facts?
I think so, and I think I often joke that people are watching science like never before. Over the last year, people don't normally watch the science unfold, so they're seeing the sausages being made and they don't like what they're seeing, right? And this is the way science happens, right? There's experts disagree. There's studies pointing in opposite directions. There's retractions. There's conflict. That's, science is ugly. It's hard. It moves forward slowly. And that's why it's so important, as I note in the book, to always look to the body of evidence. Masks are a really good example. We saw the body of evidence shift. It wasn't like they were wrong in February and January about masks. On the contrary, they had scientifically plausible concerns, the World Health Organization, the CDC. But as the evidence started to accumulate, some of it's just observational and some of it's just laboratory, a body of evidence started to emerge. And that's what informed recommendations. So hopefully, I like to be an optimist, Sean. Hopefully what people are learning is exactly what I said. Science is hard, and we've got to look at it in its totality, and not just one study, one voice.
Well, one of the reviews on the book, there's frequently, in any book, here's what people said about it. And Dr. Jen Gunter, I think, puts it very, very well. This will vaccinate you against misinformation. I like that description of the book. The book is called Relax Damnit. It is, get it on the screen. It is by Timothy Caulfield, not only a great author, researcher, but also has a great choice in glasses. I very, very much approve. Hey, Tim, the book available, chapters, Amazon, local bookstores.
All over, Amazon, anywhere. It should be all over.
Yeah, for sure. Hey, Tim,
independent bookstores too. Go independent bookstores.
Absolutely. We just got a brand new one in downtown Lethbridge called Analog Books. I'm actually going to head there hopefully this weekend before all the restrictions happen and we can't go to the store anymore. So, hey, Tim, really appreciate it. And all the best to you and success in this book, and look forward to our next chat.
Thanks so much, Sean. And thanks to the whole ag community. And of course, go science.
Absolutely. Go science. I got to give myself one of those pennants. Those are pretty sweet stuff. Hey, everybody. Thanks a lot for tuning in today. Really do appreciate it. If you do have any feedback at all, you can always get a hold of me by email, shaney@realagriculture.com. Tomorrow on RealAg Live, we're going to hear from Lancer, Saskatchewan-based farmer Jim Hale. Talk about his farming history, his family, as well as his love of machinery. This afternoon on Real Ag Radio at 4:30 Eastern on Rural Radio 147, we're going to have a great discussion with the U.S. Dairy Export Council about the possibility of a challenge from the USTR about improper Canadian dairy allocation of TRQs. Ooh, we're getting the mud from a trade perspective there. And we'll also hear from Dr. Sylvain Charlebois about the new Canadian food study for food pricing for 2021. Thanks, everybody, for getting real and getting connected with Real Ag Live, and we'll chat again tomorrow. Cheers.